What if a killer didn't just want to take lives, but wanted the entire world to know he was watching? Imagine opening your morning newspaper and finding a letter from a murderer. Not a confession, not an apology. A challenge. A challenge directed at the police. A challenge directed at the media. And a challenge directed at every ordinary person who thought they were safe. In the late 1960s, a mysterious figure emerged from the darkness of Northern California. He hunted strangers, vanished without a trace, and then sent taunting messages to newspapers, mocking investigators who desperately tried to catch him. He called himself the Zodiac. More than 50 years later, no one knows for certain who he was. And that is what makes this story so terrifying. The night of December 20th, 1968 seemed ordinary. The air was cold as two teenagers, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, parked their car along a lonely stretch of road known as Lake Herman Road in California. They were young, in love, and completely unaware that they were being watched. At some point during the evening, another vehicle pulled up nearby. What happened next remains a nightmare frozen in time. A gunman approached the couple. David was shot at close range. Betty Lou tried to run. She never got far. The killer fired multiple times into the darkness, striking her as she fled for her life. When police arrived, they found a horrifying scene but almost no clues. There were no witnesses, no clear motive, no suspect. For months, the murders remained a mystery. Then the killer struck again. On the night of July 4th, 1969, fireworks exploded across the sky as Americans celebrated Independence Day. In a quiet parking area at Blue Rock Springs Park, Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau sat inside a parked car. A vehicle slowly approached. The driver stopped nearby. For a moment, it seemed as though he might simply drive away. Instead, he stepped out carrying a flashlight and a gun. The bright beam blinded the couple. Then the shooting started. Bullets shattered the night. Michael was hit multiple times. Darlene suffered devastating injuries. The attacker briefly walked away, then returned and fired again to make sure the victims were helpless. Darlene would later die. Michael survived. But the horror wasn't over. Less than an hour later, a phone rang inside the Vallejo Police Department. A calm voice spoke. The caller reported the crime. Then he admitted responsibility for another murder. The murders at Lake Herman Road. The killer had just connected the crimes himself. And now investigators knew they were hunting a serial murderer. A few weeks later, the fear spread beyond crime scenes. 3 newspapers received nearly identical letters. The sender claimed responsibility for the murders. Inside each envelope was part of a coded message written in strange symbols. The writer demanded publication. If his instructions were ignored, more people would die. Newspaper editors faced an impossible decision: publish the words of a murderer, or risk further bloodshed. The letters appeared in print. The public was fascinated. Whoever wrote them seemed intelligent, calculating, and obsessed with attention. The codes became a national puzzle. Teachers, students, mathematicians, and amateur cryptographers all attempted to solve them. Eventually, one cipher was cracked. What investigators discovered was chilling. The message spoke about the pleasure of killing. The writer described murder as fun. He claimed that his victims would become servants for him in the afterlife. There was no remorse, no guilt, only pride. The message revealed the mind of someone who viewed human life as nothing more than a game. Days later, another letter arrived. This time it contained a phrase that would become infamous. "This is the Zodiac speaking." For the first time, the killer gave himself a name. And with that name, a legend was born. The Zodiac wasn't content with murder. He wanted fame. Every new letter increased public panic. Every newspaper headline gave him exactly what he desired: pension, power. The more people talked about him, the stronger he seemed to become. Then came one of the most terrifying attacks in the entire case. On September 27, 1969, college students Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were enjoying a peaceful afternoon near Lake Berryessa. The lake was quiet. The weather was beautiful. Nothing seemed unusual. Then a figure appeared. At first glance, he looked bizarre rather than threatening. He wore a black executioner's hood that completely concealed his face. Over his chest was a strange symbol, a circle crossed by lines. The Zodiac symbol. The hooded stranger approached calmly. He claimed to be an escaped convict who needed money and a car. The story sounded believable enough. Then everything changed. The man produced a gun. He ordered the couple to lie down. He tied them up, and then, without warning, began stabbing them. And again, and again. The attack was savage. Unlike the earlier shootings, this murder felt deeply personal. Brian somehow survived. Cecilia did not. Before leaving, the killer walked to their vehicle and wrote a chilling message on the door. He listed the dates of his previous crimes. It was his signature, his way of claiming ownership over the horror. Only 2 weeks later, the Zodiac shocked investigators once again. This time, he struck in the middle of San Francisco. Taxi driver Paul Stein picked up a passenger on the evening of October 11, 1969. The ride appeared routine. Nothing seemed suspicious. When the taxi stopped, the passenger pulled out a gun. A single shot ended Paul's life. The killer then did something disturbing. He cut away a piece of the victim's bloody shirt. Then he calmly walked away. Several witnesses observed him leaving the scene. Police came incredibly close to capturing him, but due to a communication error, officers were searching for the wrong suspect description. The Zodiac slipped away into the darkness. Once again, he escaped. Days later, newspapers received another letter. Inside was a blood-stained piece of Paul Stein's shirt. Proof. The killer wanted everyone to know that he had beaten the police yet again. As months passed, Zodiac's letters became increasingly bizarre. He threatened school buses. He claimed he would kill children. Parents became terrified. Some schools altered routines. Children were warned to be cautious. The entire region seemed trapped beneath a cloud of fear. People began looking over their shoulders. Couples stopped visiting isolated locations. Strangers became objects of suspicion. The Zodiac wasn't merely murdering people. He was infecting everyday life with paranoia. And that may have been his greatest weapon. The letters continued. So did the codes. One message contained hundreds of symbols. For decades, nobody could solve it. Experts failed. Government analysts failed. Professional cryptographers failed. The cipher became one of the greatest unsolved puzzles in criminal history. Years turned into decades. The killer disappeared. No new confirmed murders occurred. Yet the mystery refused to die. Then, more than 50 years later, a team of codebreakers finally cracked one of Zodiac's most famous encrypted messages. People hoped it would reveal his identity. It didn't. Instead, the message contained more taunts, more arrogance, more psychological games. Even from beyond the grave, the Zodiac seemed determined to keep his secrets hidden. Investigators examined countless suspects over the years. One of the most famous was Arthur Lee Allen. He lived in California. He owned weapons. Several details about him appeared suspicious. Many detectives believed he might be the Zodiac, yet no definitive evidence ever proved it. Fingerprints didn't conclusively match. DNA evidence wasn't enough. The case remained unresolved. Other suspects emerged. Each seemed promising. Each eventually led to disappointment. The Zodiac remained a ghost, a shadow without a face. What makes this story so frightening isn't simply the violence. America has seen many killers. Many murderers have claimed countless victims. The Zodiac was different. He understood fear. He understood attention. He understood how to manipulate an entire society. Every letter became an event. Every code became a challenge. Every threat became a headline. Long before social media existed, the Zodiac knew how to dominate public conversation. He transformed himself from a criminal into a myth. And myths are difficult to kill. Today, more than half a century later, the Zodiac Killer remains one of the most famous unidentified murderers in history. Investigators continue examining old evidence. New forensic techniques offer hope. Perhaps one day a forgotten clue, a DNA match, or a hidden document will finally reveal the truth. Perhaps the mystery will eventually end. Or perhaps it won't. Perhaps somewhere in an old box, buried in a dusty police archive, lies the final piece of the puzzle. Waiting, silent, unnoticed, just as the Zodiac once was. And until that answer is found, one unsettling question remains. Who was the man behind the letters? A neighbor? A coworker? A friend? Or someone who walked past countless people every day, smiling politely while carrying one of the darkest secrets in American history? Nobody knows. And that uncertainty is what keeps the Zodiac Killer alive in our nightmares.